do you start your day? Are you focused, energized, and tuned in to your higher self? Or do you wake up anxious, unmotivated, and already overwhelmed by your giant to-do list? Welcome to Coffee with the Universe with Laura Goldstein, where we'll have inspiring and practical conversations around how to reverse daily struggle and show up calm, collected, and confident instead. As a psychotherapist, spiritual advisor, yoga teacher, and influential speaker, Laura will discuss all things morning routine for increased productivity, mental clarity, greater connection with self, and better decision making. So grab your favorite cup of joe and come sit down with Laura. Coffee with the Universe starts now.
Hello and welcome everybody to Coffee with the Universe, where we have conversations around starting your day feeling calm, collected, confident, and connected to your higher self. Today's show is actually the catalyst for my whole Coffee with the Universe experience, and really that monumental experience that got me to doing what I'm doing today. So as I'm going to talk about, this is my time in Alaska, and my morning coffee consisted of waking up to fake chirping birds, because where we were in Alaska, like the sun rose, I think at like 11:30 in the morning and then set again at 3:30. So my morning, instead of like sunshine and the real chirping birds, it was one of those simulated sunrise lamps, like alarm clock lamps. So it was fake sun and fake birds chirping, but it served the purpose and did what I needed it to do in the mornings to get me up and running. Okay, so today's show, I'm talking about soul lessons that I learned from working in a native Alaskan Yupik village in the middle of nowhere. And yes, in the middle of nowhere, where you get dropped off in a bush plane, which, like, when they sent the plane that seats 8 people, we were like, woohoo, they sent us the big plane. So it was usually like a 4-seater to a 6-seater. But yes, we got dropped off in a little tiny plane in a village in Alaska. And in a lot of my copy, I used the word Eskimo village. However, there is some political, it's one of those like politically correct words. Like some of the native Alaskans, like the Inuits, were very offended by that word Eskimo, because they believe, like, the white man attached some very like nonsensical meaning to the word. But then I've seen some actual native Inuits write about that and saying, the word Eskimo reflected a way of life that they were living even before the white man came along and, started attaching, silly things to that word. So I don't refer to Eskimo frequently, but I just thought it was an interesting tidbit of information to share, because really that we were in a primarily Eskimo village. I mean, I was a minority myself and the other people that were working at the school there. So maybe there was, 15 or 20 of us total in this Yupik village. So it was definitely an experience, not just in connecting to myself and learning these soul lessons, but also on what it is like to be a cultural minority and to experience a lot of the prejudices and hatred towards white people, because in a lot of even the Native American villages, white folks are seen as those that took away their culture and their land. And I mean, for good reason. There's a lot of genocide in the history, but it was just interesting to be on that side of the cultural prejudices, because growing up like white Caucasian, I had never really experienced that before. I mean, yes, bullying in school, but Anyway, it was just a really worthwhile experience to have. So anyway, on to what we're talking about today. Most of us can identify some kind of monumental experience. Sometimes it's voluntary, like we, go on our own eat, pray, love journey. Sometimes it's forced. Things happen, divorce, job loss, health scare, things like that. But it's usually that experience that is a catalyst for a major life change. Human beings don't really like change. We like our comfort zone. But this for me was a major life change. And I really attribute my spiritual growth, connecting to my life's path and purpose, to this 2-year work-related stint I did in Kotlik. That was the name of the village. It's where I took up yoga. I mean, I had never done yoga before I got there. It's where I found enough silence to hear my inner voice. It's where I learned what I could live with and what I could live without, and kind of found the courage to not lose my crap within a culture and an environment that was so different than like big city life in Miami, where I was born and raised. So it really took being like dropped off by a bush plane and being in the middle of nowhere, with no roads, cars, restaurants, nothing like that, to really come to know myself. And it was that catalyst for I guess a life overhaul. It just really changed my life. While I was there, I did blog posts about my experience, because there's just crap. I use the word G, but I can't say that on here because I get in trouble with Benny because he has to bleep me out. But there's like the crap there that happens that you just can't make up. And some of it leads you to laughter. Some of it like leads you to tears, to anger and frustration. But I kind of learned that I can handle a lot more than I thought I could. So I want to talk about this. I wrote the blog post. I have like a book half written, but I don't know, for some reason, I just can't seem to finish it. I don't know if it's fear, fear of like putting it out there, procrastination. I don't really know what it is. Sometimes I feel like it doesn't feel exactly right. I mean, there is so much to talk about. I think that I have a hard time figuring out like how I want to articulate it. But anyway, so I just want to talk about this experience, because people will they'll ask me questions, and they'll be like, oh, that sounds really fascinating. Tell me more. And I haven't really shared the full story, just kind of like bits and pieces. So I'm using this as my inaugural sharing to what my experience was like. So if you have any questions, please feel free to pipe in. You can call in 1-800-930-2819, or if you are watching this through Facebook, if you want to type in your question. Jacob, if anybody types in a question, let me know, because I can't see the chat here. So
for sure.
You're going to have to give me a heads up. But I mean, and even if y'all have questions, please just pipe in, because I will just start talking. But it's hard to describe what it looked like. I will do my best. But if anything's unclear, you're just curious about something, let me know. All right. So how it all started, when you have like those moments where you're like, I'm not really fulfilled right now. And I'm kind of burned out, and we should do this and I should do that. That was kind of where my husband, who's now my ex-husband, we're still, good friends. So all is great. But my husband at the time and I would really talk about doing something different. Both of us were burned out at work. We just, weren't fulfilled anymore. And we talked and talked. I think we talked for like 7 freaking years before we decided to do something. And it was really one of those forced things, because my husband at the time was laid off, and I was like just spinning in circles doing community mental health. And a headhunter contacted him and said, hey, we have this school principal position in at one of the islands in Alaska. You have like the southeastern islands there, Ketchikan, and I think, Juneau. That's like the pretty part of Alaska where all the tourists go. So we were looking at this island, and it was a small island. I think there was maybe like 2,000 people on there. And so originally that was kind of our target, but that job actually fell through because the principal of the school decided to stay. So then we were like, crap, what do we do? Because we kind of already made these arrangements to go there. So we ended up at a job fair in Seattle, and there's a lot of Alaskan representation there. And so the Lower Yukon School District found us, and they're like, hey, we can give both of you jobs. And I wasn't expecting to work like, in a school per se. I mean, I was a mental health counselor. I figured, wherever we go, that there would be a hospital. Well, in the Lower Yukon, they're all Yupik villages. So there is no hospital, but they're like, hey, you can, work in the school as the school counselor and, village counselor. So I was like, oh, well, how about that? Okay, fine. We're going and both of us will get these jobs. And it's like, we had this wonderful conversation, and we're like really excited because now we have something concrete. We literally had to go back to the hotel and look at a map and figure out like where the hell Kotlik was, because we're like, oh, here we took these jobs like sight unseen. And we're like, where are we even going? And on the map, like Kotlik is a village, I think it's like closer to Russia than it was to a city in the United States. Like we were closer to Russia than Anchorage. And it was ridiculous. We were like, oh my gosh, this is where we're going. And for us to go like someplace sight unseen, I mean, that's kind of a big deal. It's really a leap of faith. You don't know what you're getting into. All we knew that it was a dry village, which meant that you could not bring in alcohol, which was fine for me because I'm not a big drinker, but my ex-husband loved his beer. I think he kind of decided it was its own food group. So I was really surprised when he was like, oh no, this is good. We're gonna go for this. I was like, oh, okay, fine. But just to give you an idea what the Lower Yukon is like. So coming from Miami, I was so excited to go to Alaska because Miami is mono-season hot and flat and palm trees and sand. And while that's beautiful for vacation, when you've lived there for 20 some odd years, you're like, okay, yeah, change of scenery, totally needed. So I was so excited about going to Alaska. I'm like, oh my God, the mountains. I'm going to be in the majestic mountains. I can look at the snow caps. It's going to be beautiful. Well, just so you know, in case you don't, the Lower Yukon is flat tundra. So the only difference in moving to Lower Yukon region in Alaska was that I moved to a flat part of Alaska with shrubs instead of palm trees and frozen ground instead of like warm sand. So it was mono-season cold. I think we could see like one mountain, like way in the distance, but it looked like a molehill. So like my first reaction was, what the hell? I left Miami going to majestic mountains and I don't get any. I get like this flat tundra. Now in the summertime, it's more like slough, like the water. And I thought, gee, why would someone like choose to build a village here? I mean, yes, I guess I know it's like along the river system there and it's good for like hunting and stuff like that. But our village in Kotlik, we actually had boardwalks that would link different parts, like the school, the post office. We had a native grocery store that carried more like native oriented products. We also had what was called the AC American Corporation. It was kind of like a glorified convenience store, like a 7-Eleven, or like a Royal Farms that we have up here in Annapolis. And then we had like a tank farm and that where we could get gas, and then a runway, which was really just like a frozen strip for the airplane. So this boardwalk would connect the different like parts of the village, the houses, to the main boardwalk, to like the school and we also had like a community center where they would do Eskimo dancing for special occasions and for entertainment. And so it's like in the summer, you had to use a four-wheeler or walk to navigate on the boardwalks. In the winter, things did freeze over. So you could actually just kind of walk off the boardwalk because the land was frozen, and you could take like shortcuts to the store and things like that. But to go someplace, I mean, just imagine there's like no cars. We had four-wheelers and snow machines, but we had no roads. So even if you had a car, I guess you could ship it out there on a barge, but there's really no place to drive to. There's no place to go because you are surrounded by rivers. So in the summer, the natives would travel from village to village through boat. And in the winter, they would use their snow machine to go across the Yukon River and just, visit with other families, because you had families that were living in different villages. So it was very isolating. The houses were not modern at all. They were like, the house that we got was like a really bad 70s, 80s mishmash type of thing. I remember walking in. I remember the phone call because my husband at the time went before I did, and he called and he's like, I just prepare yourself. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? I'm getting ready to pack up. What does that mean? Prepare yourself. Well, it was wise for him to give me a heads up because I had to decrease my expectations a lot. I mean, I wasn't expecting like the Taj Mahal or anything. I wasn't expecting super modern with granite countertops, but I was expecting something that I considered somewhat inhabitable. So there was a lot of work to be done, painting and just trying to make it livable. They were like, maybe 1 bedroom, 2 bath houses, no more than 2 bathrooms. So it's just like 1 bathroom in all of the houses. Some of them were duplex style, but just like wood frame. It's so hard to explain without showing pictures, but let's just say that it certainly is something that here in like, bigger cities, we would look at it and think, we have just like moved to a third world country. So that was my initial experience of that, getting off the plane, realizing that there really truly are no roads and cars, only being able to bring enough stuff with me and like that would fit in plastic tubs. We shipped about 12 of them there. And realizing that walking into where I was going to live needed like such an overhaul and like cleaning just to make it habitable. Like I was having like this little mini meltdown, and I'm like, okay, I just want to get back on this plane because this is not what I signed up for. But then it kind of was. I had to realize that we had no idea what we were getting into. We were ready for an adventure, and we were ready for something that would push us out of our comfort zone, because the reality is you don't know a lot about yourself unless you are pushed out of your comfort zone. There's a lot of awareness to gain when you allow yourself an experience that is completely unfamiliar and completely out of your element. And I do believe that really is the best way to get to know yourself, like the real self, not the guarded self, but the real you. Okay, so let's see, we're going to take a short break here, but when I come back, I'm just going to dive into some of the things I learned, talk a couple, about some stories. And again, if you have any questions or just want to know what something was like, please feel free to chime in. I will see you after the break. Hello and welcome back to Coffee with the Universe. Today I'm talking about soul lessons I learned while working and living in a Yupik village in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. And I kind of painted the picture before the break about what life was like. It's really hard to use words to describe. I was just talking with my producer here over the break that, I have a bunch of pictures on a CD somewhere, but it's so much more helpful to see because you just can't describe the essence of what it's like to be there. But anyway, I want to talk about a little bit about what I learned, and I call them soul lessons because these were things that I just would not have learned if I had stayed in my comfort zone, living, in a modern city, in a nice house. I don't know that I would have really understood this. And I don't think that everybody needs to have like this, I call it like my eat, pray, love adventure, although the movie was like way more sexy than what I experienced in Alaska. But it's kind of like that same thing. Until you're outside that comfort zone, you really don't know. All right. So first thing that I learned is that you don't need half the crap that you have. So when we went to Alaska, we did not we did. We sold one house before we went because we didn't want to maintain, like it had a huge lawn and we didn't want to maintain that we were gone. But we were renting a condo and we did not give that up because we're like, oh my gosh, if we go out there and we absolutely cannot manage, we're going to come home and we'll have a place to live. So we had this condo. It was pretty spacious. So it's not like, we downsized a little bit, but not a whole lot. So we kept the condo in Florida and we were only allowed to take, we could take as much as we wanted. However, you have to pack your stuff in 40-gallon tubs to ship out there because what happens is when your stuff is shipped to the Alaskan villages, you have to remember that you go from big plane to little four-seater plane. So a lot of times your stuff is sitting on a runway somewhere in a line waiting to make it to a smaller plane to get out to the village. So your stuff could be sitting in mud. It could be sitting on ice. So if you ship things out there in cardboard boxes, your bras and panties and personal belongings are probably going to be scattered somewhere on like this muddy or ice covered runway. So they told us specifically, use these plastic tubs. Well, it's $40 to ship one of these small tubs out there. So you get to the point where you're very careful about what you're sending out there. So it was like, okay, what are the essentials for the kitchen? What are the essential linens for bath and shower? What are the essential clothes? We have all of these books, what can we do with them? Kindle was I don't even know if Kindle was a thing back then. I don't even think I had my Kindle. This was back in 2011, not sure. But I don't think I had one. So, we were like, what books are essential to take? And we took the bare minimum out there. And at first, the house, as small as it was, I call it like the little sardine can that we lived in out there, it seemed like very, barren. Like we didn't even take pictures, like family pictures with us. So there was nothing on the walls except for like a couple pictures that were left behind by somebody else. And so at first it was kind of awkward because you'd be like, oh, I really, would like to use this kitchen gadget that I have, my food processor. But then you're like, okay, I don't have that. So I'm just going to, chop by hand, do it the old fashioned way. And it was really interesting because after, I would say, maybe 4 or 5 months of being there, you just kind of got used to doing it the old way. You got used to doing without certain things. And by the time the 2 years was up that we were there, to be honest, I really couldn't remember. I mean, even, we did come home for Christmas, so we did have a little bit of back and forth. But to be honest, I couldn't even remember like half the stuff that I had stored in closets in the condo. And then when I came home and I was cooking, instead of using like my food processor, I was like still just, chopping by hand and doing it the old fashioned way. And it really made me realize that we don't need half of the stuff we have. And I think that a lot of the stuff that we surround ourselves with depletes us energetically. One, because a lot of the stuff, maybe we don't really love, somebody gave it to us, or it's old, or reminds us of something. So we don't really love it. And every time we look at it, it's just kind of like, I have that thing there, but I don't really love it. And it's just like, but it's serving its purpose. It's sitting there, it's filling the space. So I don't do anything with it. So I think we have those situations where we have things that we don't really like. But two, just having so much clutter, I think it like constrains us. It makes us feel suffocated in a sense. And a lot of Buddhist philosophy is really not attaching yourself to stuff, because stuff you can lose. I mean, I hate to say this, but you have a house fire and everything goes up in flames. If you are so attached to all of your belongings, it can have a devastating effect on your psyche because you are so attached to all of that stuff. So something I learned out there is that you don't need half the crap you have, and you can do a lot with buckets and duct tape and recycling things. The natives had to be very resourceful because you didn't always get supplies out there. You couldn't go to Home Depot if you needed some new bolts. I remember my husband, he was up on the roof trying to attach a satellite dish so we could get some semblance of TV, using like these stripped bolts and duct tape that he happened to find in the shed, because we couldn't go get new ones. And the native store had like a little hardware section, but it had mostly nails and it didn't quite have the bolts that we needed. So you had to learn to be really resourceful. And I believe like there's a part of you, like the part of your brain that's stimulated when you have to be creative in putting something together. I think that, now there are so many gadgets for everything that we've lost a little bit of our creative thinking. And we found ourselves out there really having to get to that part of our brain functioning in order to solve a problem. And another thing that I got really creative with was food. I mean, vegetables were very expensive. And I'll be honest, at the store there, you could get like tomatoes that were not ripe, onions, cabbage, potato, like carrots and celery. And that was it. And I tell you, you get real sick of potatoes and cabbage and carrots after a while. So fortunately, there was a company, Full Circle Farms, that would drop ship vegetables into us like once a week or every other week. Now, granted, sometimes the weather didn't permit and we didn't get our vegetables, but like I would savor that. And this box of vegetables that would literally cost me like $25 in Florida cost me $100 out there. But I valued those vegetables so much. Like I would use carrot tops. I would use like the skins of onions that you peel off. You learn to use the parts of the food that you would normally just toss. You learn to use it because you don't necessarily need all you have, but you waste a lot of what you got. So that's kind of like the other side of it. We're a very wasteful culture, and we can recycle and reuse so much more than we do. And we can be creative in how we solve problems. All right. So that was my long, you don't need half the crap you have lesson out there. And it really made me mindful in terms of like reusing, reducing, recycling. And even now, if I can reuse something or repurpose or make like a soup with all of the parts and pieces of the veggies that I cut up, I still do that. That's still something that I held on to, even though it's been over a decade since I was in Kotlik. Another thing I learned is that there is peace in not being connected 24/7. So in 2011, I think we were at like 3G on cell phones. So we had smartphones, but definitely not like super fast like we have today. But in the lower Yukon, you couldn't get data. So having a smartphone out there was really like a moot point. The only reason you'd have it, you could connect to the Wi-Fi at the school there where we worked. And, you could, watch videos and stuff, but you couldn't make calls. So we had, if you worked at the school and you were administrator, you had a flip phone that you could use. The rest of us, we were just out of luck. We basically had to Skype friends and family. And so there really was no phone. Also with internet, it was very expensive to have internet, and the school had it. And it worked. It was kind of slow, and depending on the weather, because it was satellite, sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. So when we were like at home, we were literally at home, disconnected from Facebook, from the phones, from social media, from calls. So like my friends and family at home knew that if they called us at a certain time, we weren't going to answer because we were at home and we had like no connection. Now we did have some TV. We had a satellite out there, so we could get like the basic channel functioning, which was kind of nice. We had, some semblance of entertainment, but I realized how much I did not miss Facebook. And Facebook was kind of a new thing too back then. It really wasn't, the extent it is today. But I did not miss it. And I actually felt calm at home. I slept really well there. And I think because I didn't have so much noise all the time. And something that I noticed as soon as we moved back to the continental United States was that the noise irritated my brain and my head and my mind like so much more than it did before. I got so used to being disconnected and to being quiet where I could actually hear myself, to coming back, and it was like information and stimulation overload. I just wanted to like go in my closet and shut out the noise and like stop being so noisy. And it took me a while to acclimate back into the world of social media, being online, being on the computer all the time. And granted, even today, I will note like I need to do like this disconnect detox because my anxiety is skyrocketing and I'm having like trouble figuring out like what direction I want to go in. It's like I'm having trouble making decisions. I'm kind of confused. I'm kind of scattered. And I realize now that it's because of the noise and the information that's just being thrown at me that I can't even hear myself think. So I think there's a lot of validity to disconnecting, to taking breaks from cell phone, from Facebook, from Instagram, separating yourself from the noise, not having to have all of that input all the time. And even like when I go to yoga classes, sometimes like I know in my Kundalini class, I'll use like music if there's a mantra or a specific like sequence that we're moving to. But some yoga classes that I've been to, they actually use like modern music, just like playing in the background. And I thought, this is time for yoga. It's like I don't like those classes. I want the quiet and the solitude. So I have to be selective about what I'm doing, even when I'm practicing yoga, because that is a chance to quiet the mind and to give yourself that space to really listen to yourself. Right. And I think that was the biggest value. I don't know that I'd be able to do what I'm doing today unless I had that time to really get to know who I was and to listen to that inner voice. Okay, we're going to take one last break. And when we come back, I will continue talking about some of my experiences, some of the things that I learned. If you have any questions and you're on Facebook, please feel free to type them in. If you want to give us a call, 1-800-930-2819. I will see you after the break. Hello and welcome back to Coffee with the Universe, where I'm talking about soul lessons that I learned in a remote native Yupik village in the lower Yukon, Alaska, which is in the middle of nowhere. And the village was called Kotlik, which actually means pants in English. So I lived in Pants, Alaska, but that was only because the river where we were was like divided. So if you actually looked at it on a map, it kind of looked like a pair of pants. So that's where it came from. Just some fun lower Yukon trivia for you all, because the lower Yukon is a place in Alaska that no person in their right mind chooses to go voluntarily, and definitely does not go for a vacation and to see the pretty parts of Alaska. Now, fortunately, while we were there, we had the opportunity to travel to Anchorage and into Fairbanks and the Seward Peninsula. So we did get to see a lot of the nicer parts of Alaska, but where I lived and worked for a couple of years, not so much. Okay. Some more soul lessons that I learned. Home is what you make of it. So I just sent Jacob a couple photos that I happened to find during the breaks. I don't know where do they get posted, Jacob?
They'll show up on Facebook Live and then on YouTube after the show.
Okay, so Facebook Live and YouTube. So I sent a couple pictures of like the house, one of me, and then you can kind of see like the frozen tundra. I mean, it was very pretty in terms of like the colors and stuff, but you can just get the idea of like the isolation and the vastness of what it was like out there. But another thing I learned is home is really what you make of it. And, you know, I mentioned in the last segment that I had a little bit of a meltdown when we got there and I saw the condition of the house. We didn't even like, I knew something was wrong. I knew something was wrong when we went to the school to check in before we even saw our houses. And they handed me a key to the front door that was like a freaking padlock key. And I was like, no, you know, where's the house key? This is like to a padlock. They're like, no, this is the key to the house. So believe it or not, our door lock was a freaking padlock on the front of the door that you use this little key to open the padlock. And I thought, my initial thought was like, oh my God, somebody could totally come and like padlock us in. And then I was like, oh, duh, all you need to do is just kind of like lock the padlock we have on that one little loop and not shut it, and nobody will do that. But I'm like, how ridiculous is that? Who has a padlock to open your front door? So that was like the first, it was like the initial, you know, warning sign. Okay, this is not going to be what you expect. And next to the house, the principal of the school who lived there before us, like built a hot tub. And I don't even know how it was possible, because like it was made of wood. And I'm like, well, wouldn't the water like leak? I have no idea, but it looked like a circus ring where you like tame lions attached to the side of the house. I mean, seriously, it was like this round wooden platform with this, you know, barbed wire around it. And I mean, it looked like you should be back there with Siegfried and Roy and doing the whole lion thing, tigers and lions. So, you know, I was like, okay. And then the inside of the house, I remember walking into the kitchen and almost having my second heart attack of the day there, because like the countertops were this like ugly mustard yellow formica, but it was thin formica. And it was almost like they didn't have an entire slab. They had these little squares. So they took nails and hammered in these squares of this like ugly mustard formica on the countertops. And I guess, mustard with like mustard paint color too. I guess that was like the Please Take Me Home paint special at the Home Depot in Anchorage, or we'll ship it to you for free because it's the ugliest color on the planet. That's kind of like what the kitchen was painted. The walls of the house, a blue shade, which at least was somewhat decent, and like teal old carpeting. I mean, it was so aesthetically unappealing. And so when you get there and you look at, oh my God, this is where I'm going to be living, and you're having this meltdown, you have to take a couple deep breaths and, get your crap together and just say, okay, I can handle anything. There's this phrase that I use, like, God, the universe won't give me anything that I can't handle. So I kept like repeating that to myself. I can handle this. I wouldn't be here if I couldn't handle this. And it's interesting because after a while, we really started to not notice like the ugliness of the house. It became home, and we cleaned it and we made it, as sanitary as possible. We, painted some things. I found some white exterior paint, and I did paint over the mustard yellow paint color in the kitchen. So we did make it a little more aesthetically pleasing, but it was still ugly. It was still old. It was still worn down and very, very rustic. But it became home, and it became comfortable. And you say, how can you be comfortable in like such a yucky environment? But you somehow make it comfortable. So it's like, I would go home and we'd, get cozy on the sofa. And after a while, it just didn't matter all that much. The aesthetics just didn't seem to be all that important, because home is really what you make of it, no matter what it looks like. Even if you fall on like hard financial times and have to downsize or sell this home that you love and go into a rental that, you don't quite like, it is what you make of it. And we have so much more power with our mind to make a place comfortable and welcoming than we think we do. We think we need like shiny, bright, new, but we really don't. So home and where you are is what you make of it, no matter what. Another thing I learned is that, there is such a thing as making water. Yes, we couldn't drink water from the tap because it came through the river, and we had like filters to keep like the rocks out and stuff, but it certainly wasn't like bacteria free. So we had these water distillers, and it takes about 4 hours to make a gallon of water, just so you know, in case you need to know that. And we would have to make water every morning. I'd fill out my little water distiller and I'd put the gallon jug under there and I would make water. Who'd have thunk? I learned that it's important to be open to other perspectives, and this requires a release of control. It is a lot less anxiety-ridden life to not try to control everyone and everything. Control was a huge lesson that I learned out there. And this will probably be my final point of the show, just because to stay safe, it is part of the human condition to want to control everything. We try to control the people, places, things around us happening. We want to just, control it so that it is exactly how we think it should be. But let me tell you, when you go to a place like Kotlik, Alaska, reality slaps you in the face. There is so much you can't control, especially the weather. You cannot control that you were supposed to fly into Anchorage today, but there's a snowstorm and now you're snowed in for 3 days. And sorry, no trip for you. You can't control that you went to a different village for an event and you get snowed in there. And now you're camping on the school floor because you can't make it back to your village. You can't control when, something breaks and we have no water and we don't have the resources to fix it. So they have to ship something in. There was so much that was out of our control that you had to get flexible, like slinky flexible, to not have like this anxiety-ridden meltdown. You really had to learn to go with the flow and be okay with whatever came up. Now, this doesn't mean that it didn't trigger like anxiety, but I think this is one of the reasons why I took up yoga and like meditation there, because I knew I needed some tools in order to help me cope with all of the unexpected things that happened. And sometimes we had tragedies in the village. Unfortunately, the suicide rate is high rates of alcoholism, even though it's a dry village. The locals would make their own alcohol. It's, like moonshine, bootleg and stuff. And, we had deaths, we had accidents, things happened. And it's not like we had a hospital, we had a small clinic, but if there was an emergency, like the village pretty much shut down, they had to, send in a trauma hawk. So it's kind of a big deal. And you had to learn to try to not control and to be open to a different way of seeing things. We had to, sometimes rely on the knowledge and wisdom and the resourcefulness of the Native Alaskans there, because what do we know? My husband got a call that there was a bear in the village, and he's like, "What do you want me to do? I'm a white guy from Miami. What am I supposed to do with a bear in the village?" So he had to rely on the expertise of, the locals and what to do when some things like this happen. And we also have to understand, like, I went there and I was a visitor, a guest amongst a people in a culture that was very unfamiliar to me. And I had to be respectful of the cultural norms, even if I didn't understand that. And it really helped me to open up to other perspectives, to really manage and just be accepting of things, even if it didn't seem right to me, even if it didn't seem like appropriate. I had to understand that was the way of life there, and that was their culture. And I just needed to honor and respect that. And that was probably the hardest lesson that I had to learn, was the whole control and letting things flow. Okay, I could talk about this forever. There was just so much, but our time is up today. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about how some of these things can really give you a new perspective. Putting yourself outside your comfort zone can be super healthy for you if you find yourself stuck in a rut. It's these kind of experiences that help us grow or accomplish things that, we didn't even think achievable. So the message here is, start putting yourself in a position that you may not be comfortable with. See what happens. Allow yourself to grow and experience something different. Thanks for listening. See you next time on Coffee with the Universe here on Transformation Talk Radio every third Tuesday of the month at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you for joining me for Coffee with the Universe. Make sure to tune in next time as I continue to share tips and tricks to help you stop waking up anxious, uninspired, and energetically drained in the morning and feel calm, connected to your higher self, and confident instead. If you would like more information on my Morning Magic course, please visit www.cwtu.net/morningmagic.